By the spring of 1965, the Beatles had already become the biggest band in the world. Every new single they released climbed the charts, every album broke sales records, and Beatlemania showed no signs of slowing down. Yet, despite their enormous success, John Lennon and Paul McCartney were becoming increasingly restless as songwriters. Rather than simply repeating the formula that had made them famous, they wanted to push popular music into new territory. That desire for innovation led to one of the most important singles of their career, Ticket to Ride. Released in 1965 as the lead single from Help, the Beatles' fifth studio album, Ticket to Ride initially sounded like another chart-topping love song. In reality, it quietly introduced several musical ideas that would influence rock music for years to come. The Beatles began expanding the boundaries of the pop single. Written primarily by Paul McCartney and John Lennon, Ticket to Ride runs just over 3 minutes. That may not seem unusual today, but in 1965, it was remarkably long for a hit single. During the early 1960s, most successful pop songs rarely exceeded the 3-minute mark. Radio stations preferred shorter records because they allowed more songs and more advertising to fit into their programming. The Beatles themselves had built their early career on concise, energetic singles like She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and Can't Buy Me Love. Ticket to Ride represented a noticeable shift. Instead of rushing from one hook to the next, the song unfolds at a more deliberate pace. The heavier groove, spacious arrangement, and extended instrumental passages allow the music to breathe in ways that were uncommon for mainstream pop at the time. Although Lennon and McCartney probably weren't trying to start a revolution, the success of Ticket to Ride demonstrated that audiences were willing to embrace longer, more ambitious singles. It helped prove that commercial success didn't have to come at the expense of musical experimentation. The Beatles themselves would continue stretching the limits of what a hit single could be. Only 3 years later, they released Hey Jude, an epic 7-minute single built around an unforgettable 4-minute sing-along coda. At the time, it became one of the longest songs ever to top the charts. Even beyond their singles, they grew increasingly comfortable abandoning traditional time limits. Their sprawling 1969 recording, I Want You, She's So Heavy from Abbey Road, stretches to nearly 8 minutes and remains one of the band's most hypnotic studio performances. A new era for longer songs. The Beatles were not alone in challenging radio conventions. Around the same time, Bob Dylan was rewriting expectations with Like a Rolling Stone. Released in 1965, the song runs just over 6 minutes, an extraordinary length for a commercial single, and still became Dylan's first top 5 hit. Together, Dylan and the Beatles helped convince both radio programmers and record labels that listeners were willing to stay engaged with songs that took their time developing. Rather than treating 3 minutes as an unbreakable rule, artists increasingly viewed it as merely a suggestion. Throughout the late 1960s and into the 1970s, longer compositions became increasingly common across rock music, paving the way for progressive rock, psychedelic experimentation, and ambitious album-oriented songwriting. Beneath the melody lies a story of heartbreak. Despite its driving rhythm and memorable chorus, Ticket to Ride is far from a carefree pop song. At its core, the song tells the story of a man watching a relationship collapse while feeling powerless to stop it. The opening lines immediately establish the emotional tone. The repeated refrain, "She's got a ticket to ride, but she don't care," captures the painful realization that the woman has emotionally moved on long before physically leaving. Like many Lennon and McCartney compositions from this period, the lyrics remain intentionally open to interpretation. Rather than explaining every detail, they leave enough ambiguity for listeners to project their own experiences onto the story, making the song emotionally universal. One of the most groundbreaking aspects of Ticket to Ride arrives at its conclusion. Instead of simply repeating the chorus until the fade-out, a common practice for pop records of the era, the Beatles introduced an entirely new musical section. The tempo shifts, the melody changes, and the repeated phrase, "My baby don't care," transforms into something fresh rather than merely repetitive. Paul McCartney later reflected on why the ending felt so different. "I think the interesting thing was a crazy ending. Instead of ending like the previous verse, we changed the tempo. We picked up one of the lines, "My baby don't care," but completely altered the melody. We almost invented the idea of a new bit of a song on the fade-out with this song. It was something specially written for the fade-out, which was very effective. But it was quite cheeky, and we did a fast ending. It was quite radical at the time. That creative decision may seem subtle today, but in 1965, it challenged listeners' expectations of how a pop record should conclude. Instead of fading out on a familiar refrain, the Beatles used the ending as an opportunity to introduce fresh musical ideas, foreshadowing the increasingly adventurous arrangements that would define albums like Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The song Lennon considered the first heavy metal record. Years later, Lennon made one of his most surprising observations about Ticket to Ride. He claimed that in many ways, it was the first heavy metal song ever released. If you go and look in the charts for what other music people were making, it's a heavy record, and the drums are heavy too.
While historians generally credit later bands such as Black Sabbath or Led Zeppelin with establishing heavy metal as a genre, Lennon's point was less about labels and more about sound. Compared with most pop records of 1965, Ticket to Ride possessed an unusually powerful rhythmic foundation. Ringo Starr's pounding drum pattern, the dense guitar textures, and the song's slower, weightier groove gave it a muscular quality that stood apart from nearly everything else dominating the charts. In retrospect, it's easy to hear why Lennon believed the record pointed towards a heavier future, a song that quietly changed popular music. Ticket to Ride may never receive the same universal recognition as classics like Yesterday, Hey Jude, or Let It Be, but its influence is impossible to ignore. It marked a turning point in the Beatles' evolution from hit-making pop stars into fearless musical innovators. The song challenged assumptions about the ideal length of a single, experimented with an unconventional ending, embraced a heavier sonic character, and hinted at the increasingly sophisticated songwriting that would define the second half of the band's career. Looking back more than 6 decades later, Ticket to Ride stands as far more than another #1 hit. It represents the moment when the Beatles began proving that popular music could be commercially successful while simultaneously breaking its own rules, a philosophy that would reshape rock music for generations to come.